"Share me with your friends," the homeless giant bride whispered, but the lonely rancher said, "You." The rancher had lived alone for many years, long enough that silence felt normal to him. His ranch sat far from the main road, surrounded by open land that stretched as far as the eye could see. Every morning he woke before sunrise, fed his animals, checked the fences, and worked until his body felt heavy. In the evenings he sat on the porch with a cup of warm tea, watching the sky change colors. He rarely spoke to anyone, not because he hated people, but because life had slowly pulled everyone away from him. People in the nearby town knew him as a quiet man. They said he was kind but distant. Some said he was lonely. Others said he chose this life. The truth was somewhere in between. Years ago he had dreamed of a family, of laughter filling his home, but things did not turn out that way. Loss had visited him once, and after that he learned how to survive alone. One late afternoon, while driving back from town with supplies, he noticed something unusual near an old roadside shelter. It was a place where travelers sometimes rested, but it had been empty for months. That day, however, someone was sitting there. At first he thought it was a trick of light. Then he slowed his truck and looked again. A woman sat on the broken bench, her head lowered. What caught his attention was her height. Even while sitting, she seemed taller than most people standing. She wore a long, worn dress, and beside her lay a white veil, dusty and torn at the edges. It looked like something from another life, something that did not belong on the side of a quiet road. The rancher felt a strange pull in his chest. He told himself to keep driving. It was not his business. Life had taught him that getting involved often led to pain. But something about the way she sat still, patient, as if expecting nothing, made his hands tighten on the steering wheel. He stopped the truck. He stepped out slowly, careful not to scare her. The sound of the door closing made her look up. Her face was calm, but her eyes were tired, carrying a weight that could not be hidden. She did not ask for help. She did not smile. She simply watched him, waiting. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded once, then shook her head as if unsure which answer was true. He noticed her hands were rough and her shoes were worn thin. He reached into the truck and brought her a bottle of water. "Here," he said. "You look like you could use this." She accepted it with both hands, careful and polite. She drank slowly, then whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was soft, almost too soft for someone of her size. That surprised him. He had expected something louder, stronger. Instead, there was a quiet sadness in her tone. They sat in silence for a moment. The wind moved through the tall grass and the sky began to darken. The rancher knew he should leave, but his feet would not move. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked. She hesitated, then gave a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "Not really." He nodded, understanding more than he said. He had known that feeling well. His eyes fell on the veil beside her. "That's unusual," he said carefully, "for the road." Her fingers brushed the fabric. "It was supposed to be for a happy day," she said. "I kept it because it reminds me that I was once chosen, even if it didn't last." He didn't ask more. He had learned that some stories come out only when they are ready. As he turned to leave, thinking he had done enough, she spoke again. Her words stopped him mid-step. "Share me with your friends," she whispered. He turned back, confused. "What?" She looked down as if embarrassed by her own words. "That's what people usually do," she said quietly. "They help for a while, then pass me on. No one keeps me." Something tightened in his chest. He did not know why those words hurt him, but they did. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, but he did not know her well enough to say that. All he could do was stand there, feeling the weight of her belief. "I'm not sure I have many friends," he said honestly. She gave a small, surprised laugh. "Neither do I." The sky darkened further and the road grew quiet. The rancher looked at his truck, then back at her. He thought of the long drive back to his empty ranch, the quiet dinner, the silent night. Then he thought of her sitting alone, waiting for someone to move her along like an object. "I have a place," he said slowly. "It's not fancy. And I don't know how long you'd want to stay, but you could rest there for the night." She looked up, startled. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he replied, "but I can." She studied his face, searching for something, pity maybe, or regret. She found neither, only honesty. "All right," she said at last. The drive to the ranch was quiet. She sat carefully in the passenger seat, her knees nearly touching the dashboard. She kept her hands folded in her lap, as if afraid to take up too much space. The rancher noticed this and felt another ache in his chest. When they arrived, the ranch was lit by the soft glow of the setting sun. The land looked peaceful, wide, and open. She stepped out of the truck and looked around, her eyes filling with something close to wonder. "It's big," she said. "So are you," he replied without thinking. She froze, then laughed softly. This time the sound held a bit of warmth. He showed her the old barn, clean but unused. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "There's a small room inside. I'll bring blankets." "Thank you," she said again, her voice thick with emotion. As he walked back to the house, the rancher felt unsettled. He had not planned this. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long while, the quiet did not feel so heavy. Inside the barn, the tall woman sat on the edge of the bed, holding her veil. She looked at the door, half expecting him to change his mind. When he didn't, she whispered to herself, "Just one night." Neither of them knew it yet, but this meeting, on a forgotten road under a fading sky, had already begun to change something deep inside them both. Morning came quietly to the ranch. The sun rose slowly, spreading soft light across the open land. Birds moved between fence posts, and the animals began to stir. The rancher woke, as he always did, early and without an alarm. For a moment, he forgot about the woman in the barn. Then he remembered, and his chest felt strangely tight. He washed his face, made simple food, and poured 2 cups of tea before realizing what he was doing. He paused, then shook his head slightly. Still, he carried the extra cup with him as he walked toward the barn. She was already awake. He saw her outside, standing near the fence, watching the horses. Even from a distance, her height was clear. She stood tall but careful, as if trying not to disturb the land around her. When she noticed him, she stepped back quickly, worried she had crossed a line. "I hope it's okay," she said. "I didn't touch anything." "That's fine," he replied. "They don't mind company." He handed her the tea. She accepted it with a grateful nod. Her hands trembled slightly, not from cold but from nerves. He noticed how she kept her shoulders bent forward as if trying to appear smaller. They stood in silence for a while, sipping their tea. The rancher was used to silence, but this one felt different. It wasn't empty. It felt careful. "You can stay for breakfast," he said at last. "If you want," she hesitated. "I don't want to be a problem." "You're not," he said simply. She followed him into the house, ducking slightly under the doorframe. Inside, the home was plain but clean. Old furniture, simple walls, nothing fancy. It looked like a place built for one man and his routines. She sat carefully at the table, hands folded again in her lap. He served her food and watched as she waited, unsure when to start. "You can eat," he said gently. "Thank you," she whispered, and began slowly, as if afraid the food might disappear if she rushed. As they ate, he asked her small questions: where she was from, how long she had been on the road. She answered honestly but briefly, as if she had learned not to take up too much space with her story. After a while, she spoke without being asked. "I was supposed to be married," she said quietly. He looked up but did not interrupt. "The dress, the veil, everything was ready," she continued. "But his family didn't like me. They said I would draw attention, that people would stare. They said life would be harder with someone like me." The rancher felt a familiar anger rise, slow and steady. "So they called it off?" he asked. She nodded. "He didn't stop them. He said he cared, but not enough to stand against them." She stared at her cup. "After that, I didn't know where to go. I had given up my room, my job." Everything was planned around a future that never happened. The rancher understood more than he let on. He had also built a future once, only to watch it fade. I thought someone would help, she went on. And they did for a while, but it was always temporary. I stayed with one person, then another. Each time I was told not to get comfortable. He remembered her words from the roadside, "Share me with your friends." They said it kindly, she added quickly. They weren't bad people, just careful. I learned not to expect more. The rancher leaned back in his chair. You don't have to explain yourself here. She looked up, surprised. I do. No, he said. You're not a burden just for existing. Her eyes filled slightly, but she looked away. Later that day, he went about his work, expecting her to stay inside or rest. Instead, she followed him at a distance, watching. When he struggled with a heavy gait, she stepped forward without asking and lifted it with ease. You didn't have to, he began. I wanted to help, she said quickly. I know how people look at me, but I can be useful. He studied her face. You don't need to prove anything here. She nodded, though he could tell she wasn't convinced. Word traveled fast in small towns. By afternoon, a neighbor drove by slowly, eyes narrowing when he noticed the tall woman near the barn. The truck didn't stop, but judgment lingered in the air. That evening, the rancher suggested a trip into town to pick up supplies. She stiffened. I don't think that's a good idea, she said. Why not? She hesitated. People stare. Sometimes they say things. He waited. You don't have to go. After a long pause, she nodded. I can't hide forever. In town, heads turned. Conversation stopped. Children stared openly. A few people whispered. The rancher felt the weight of it all and saw her shrink beside him, shoulders bending, eyes lowered. As they walked past the store, someone laughed quietly. She flinched. Let's go, she whispered. I don't belong here. The rancher stopped walking. You belong wherever you stand, he said firmly. Her eyes widened. No one had ever said that to her before. On the drive back, she stared out the window. I told you, she said softly. This is why people don't keep me. I make things uncomfortable. The rancher gripped the steering wheel. You didn't make anything uncomfortable. Their thinking did. She shook her head. It's easier to believe it's my fault. Back at the ranch, night fell quietly. She stood outside the barn, holding her veil again. You've done more than enough, she said. Tomorrow I'll move on. You can share me with someone else. He looked at her, really looked at her. Not as someone passing through, but as a person who had been taught she was temporary. For the first time in many years, the rancher felt something stir inside him. Not fear, not loneliness, but the quiet beginning of a choice. And neither of them realized yet how much that choice would cost and heal them both. The next morning felt different, even before either of them spoke. The rancher woke up with the same habits, the same routine, but something inside him was no longer quiet. He kept thinking about her words from the night before, about how easily she believed she should leave. It troubled him more than he expected. When he stepped outside, the air was cool and clear. He saw her near the water pump, carefully filling a bucket. She had tied her hair back and her sleeves were rolled up. She worked slowly, as if afraid to spill anything or do something wrong. You don't have to do that, he said. She startled slightly, then smiled in a nervous way. I wanted to help before I go. Before you go where? He asked. She looked down. Anywhere else? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over and took the other bucket. If you're going to help, he said, we'll do it together. She hesitated, then nodded. They spent the morning working side by side. He showed her how to check the fence lines, how to move carefully around the animals. She listened closely, remembering everything he said. When a calf wandered too far, she moved calmly and guided it back, speaking softly. The animal trusted her without fear. The rancher watched this quietly. He noticed how gentle she was, how careful not to scare or force anything. It surprised him. People often judged her by her size, but here, among the animals, she fit naturally. At one point, he slipped on loose dirt near the shed. Before he could react, she reached out and steadied him with ease. Are you okay? She asked, worry clear on her face. He nodded, embarrassed but grateful. Thank you. She quickly stepped back, as if afraid she had crossed a line. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he said. "You helped." She looked at him, confused by how normal his tone was. No fear, no discomfort, just acceptance. During lunch, they sat under the shade of a tree. The food was simple. The moment was quiet. This time, the silence felt easier. "Why did you really stop that day?" she asked suddenly. He thought for a moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "Something told me not to keep driving." She nodded slowly. "Most people do." They talked more that afternoon, not about heavy things but small ones. Where he learned to work the land, what places she had seen while moving from one temporary place to another. She spoke about long bus rides, short stays, and always leaving before she became a problem. "I learned to pack light," she said, "and to leave early." "That sounds tiring," he said. "It is," she replied honestly. By evening, clouds gathered in the distance. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain. The rancher looked toward the sky with concern. "A storm's coming," he said. "A strong one." She straightened. "What can I do?" He paused. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said firmly. "Please." They worked quickly, securing loose items and guiding the animals to safer areas. The wind grew stronger and thunder rolled across the land. Rain began to fall hard, soaking everything. At one point, a gate broke loose. Without hesitation, she ran toward it, bracing herself against the wind and holding it in place until he could secure it. Rain poured down her face, but she didn't move. "Go inside," he shouted. "Not yet," she called back. When it was finally secure, they ran for shelter, both soaked and breathing hard. Inside the barn, the storm raged on, loud and relentless. She stood there, water dripping from her hair, chest rising and falling. He looked at her with a new kind of respect. "You didn't have to do that," he said again. She met his eyes. "I wanted to stay." Those words lingered between them. Later that night, the storm eased. They sat on opposite sides of the barn, sharing a quiet meal. She wrapped herself in a blanket, still damp but smiling faintly. "You know," she said softly, "most people would have sent me away before the storm. It's easier not to deal with someone extra." He frowned. "You're not extra." She looked at him, surprised. Then she whispered, almost out of habit, "You can share me with your friends if it becomes too much." Something inside him snapped, not in anger toward her, but toward the idea that had been planted in her mind for so long. "Why do you keep saying that?" he asked, more gently than firmly. She stared at the floor. "Because it's safer if I expect to leave, it hurts less when I do." He nodded slowly. "That makes sense." She looked up, unsure. "But that doesn't mean it's right," he added. She didn't respond. She wasn't ready to believe him yet. That night, as he lay in bed, the rancher couldn't sleep. He thought about how easily she helped, how carefully she spoke, how quickly she prepared to disappear. He realized how empty his days had been before she arrived, how silent his evenings were. In the barn, she sat awake as well, holding her veil. She had planned to leave at first light. That was always the rule. Don't stay long. Don't hope. Don't belong. But the storm had shown her something she hadn't expected. For the first time in a long while, someone hadn't treated her as a problem to manage. He had worked beside her, trusted her, and spoken to her like she mattered. Still, fear whispered louder than hope. The next morning, she began packing her few things. When the rancher came to check on her, he saw the bag by the door. "You're leaving," he said quietly. She nodded. "It's better this way." "For who?" he asked. She didn't answer. He watched her for a long moment. Then he said, "You can stay longer if you want. There's work and space." She swallowed hard. "People say that until they change their minds." "I'm not people," he replied. "I'm me." She looked at him, really looked at him, searching for signs of doubt. She didn't see any. That scared her more than rejection ever had. "I don't know how to stay," she whispered. He nodded. "Then we'll figure it out slowly." She lowered herself onto the bed, overwhelmed. Staying meant hoping. Hoping meant risking pain. Outside, the land stretched wide and open, just like the choice in front of them both. And for the first time, neither of them walked away. Days passed quietly, but they were no longer empty. The rancher and the woman settled into a simple rhythm. Mornings began early, with soft light spreading over the land. She helped where she could, never rushing, always careful. He showed her more of the work and she learned quickly. Still, she kept her bag packed near the door, as if ready to leave at any moment. He noticed this but did not mention it. He understood that trust did not grow overnight. The town, however, did not forget. One afternoon, while the rancher was repairing a fence near the road, a truck slowed down. Two men from town leaned out, their expressions curious and uneasy. "So," one of them said, glancing toward the barn, "we hear you've got company." The rancher stood up straight. "That's right." The other man shifted uncomfortably. "People are talking." "They always do," the rancher replied calmly. The men exchanged looks, just making sure everything's normal. The rancher met their eyes without flinching. "Everything is fine." They drove off, but the message stayed behind. That evening he found the woman sitting quietly outside the barn, staring at the ground. "They came, didn't they?" she asked. "Yes," he said honestly. Her shoulders sank. "I knew it. This is where it changes." "Nothing has changed," he said. She shook her head. "It always does." That night the wind rose again, stronger than before. Dark clouds rolled in quickly and the air grew tense. The rancher checked the sky and frowned. This storm would be worse. "We need to move the animals to higher ground," he said. She was already on her feet. "Tell me what to do." They worked fast. The wind howled, pushing against them. Rain fell hard, turning the ground slippery. One of the older horses panicked, refusing to move. The rancher tried to guide it, but the animal reared back. Before he could react, the woman stepped forward, placing herself between the horse and danger. She spoke softly, steady and calm, her tall frame unmoving against the storm. Slowly, the horse followed her. The rancher watched in awe. She wasn't forcing strength. She was offering safety. As the storm grew worse, part of the fence collapsed. Water rushed through, threatening to scatter the animals. Without waiting, she ran to the break, holding the loose posts in place while he secured them. "Go back," he shouted over the wind. "I've got this," she called back. Rain soaked her completely. Mud covered her hands. Still, she didn't move until the fence was safe. When the last animal was secured, they reached shelter, exhausted and shaking. The barn doors rattled but held. Inside, the woman leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from relief. "You didn't have to risk yourself like that," the rancher said. She looked at him, surprised. "I wasn't risking myself. I was protecting what matters." Something in her words struck him deeply. When the storm finally passed, silence returned. The rancher stepped outside to check the damage. The woman followed. The land was messy but safe. The animals were calm. Nothing important was lost. He turned to her. "You saved this place tonight." She shook her head. "We did." The next morning, neighbors arrived, pretending concern but filled with curiosity. They praised the rancher for handling the storm well. Some glanced at the woman, unsure how to act. One man muttered, "She's strong." "Yes," the rancher said clearly, "she is." The woman stood a little taller. Later that day, she began packing again. The bag came out. The veil was folded carefully. "I should go," she said. "Now that the storm's over." He frowned. "Why now?" "Because people are watching," she replied. "Soon they'll expect you to choose." "I already have," he said. She froze. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said calmly. "This is your home if you want it." Tears filled her eyes, but fear still held her back. "You don't understand. Staying means I'll be seen, judged, blamed." He stepped closer. "You were seen last night and you were respected." She shook her head. "Not everyone will understand." "I don't need everyone," he said. "I just need to do what's right." That night she sat alone in the barn, wrestling with her thoughts. For so long, she had learned to leave before being pushed. Staying felt dangerous. The rancher, meanwhile, stood on his porch, looking out at the land. He knew his choice would cost him comfort and silence. But he also knew that sending her away would cost him something far greater. As the moon rose, the woman stepped out of the barn and walked toward the house. "I'm scared," she admitted. He nodded. "So am I." She took a deep breath. "I don't know how long I can stay." "That's okay," he said. "Stay today." She smiled faintly. For the first time, she unpacked her bag. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring. But for that night, under a quiet sky, they stood together, no longer hiding from the storm but facing the world side by side. Morning arrived gently, as if the land itself wanted to give them peace. The sky was clear, and the air felt lighter after the storms of the past days. The woman woke early, not because she had to, but because her mind was full. For the first time in a long while, she had slept without planning an escape. She stepped outside the barn and looked around. The ranch felt different now. Not perfect, not free of problems, but steady. She breathed deeply, letting the calm sink in. Still, old habits pulled at her. She folded her blanket neatly. She placed her bag near the door just in case. The rancher noticed. He didn't say anything at first. He believed some things needed time more than words. They shared breakfast quietly. The silence was comfortable, not heavy. When they finished, he stood up and looked at her carefully. "There's something I need to do today," he said. She nodded. "All right." "I may need you to come with me," he added. Her body stiffened. "To town?" "Yes." Fear crossed her face. "People will talk." "They already do," he said calmly. "But this time they'll hear me." She searched his face. "You don't have to." "I want to," he replied. The drive into town felt longer than before. She kept her hands folded, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Memories of stairs and whispers filled her mind. She prepared herself to be invisible. When they arrived, people noticed immediately. Conversations paused. Eyes followed them. A few whispers drifted through the air. The rancher stepped out first, then walked around and opened her door without hesitation. That small action caught attention. She stepped out slowly, standing tall without meaning to. Her height was impossible to ignore. They walked side by side into the store. Someone finally spoke. "Didn't expect to see you here," a man said to the rancher. "Life surprises us," the rancher replied. Another person glanced at the woman. "She's staying with you?" "Yes," he said clearly, "she is." There was silence. The woman felt her heart pound. She waited for the familiar discomfort, the shift, the pressure to disappear. Instead, the rancher continued. "She helped save my animals during the storm. She protected my land when it mattered." A few people looked uneasy. Others looked thoughtful. "She's strong," someone said quietly. "She's more than that," the rancher replied. "She's kind and she's welcome." The woman felt tears sting her eyes. No one had ever spoken for her like this. Not in public, not without fear. They finished their errands and left town. On the drive back, she finally spoke. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Because it was true," he said, "and because you shouldn't have to keep explaining yourself." Back at the ranch, the sun sat high in the sky. She stood near the barn, holding her veil again. This time she didn't clutch it for comfort. She looked at it as something from a past she no longer had to live in. "I used to think I was something people borrowed," she said softly. "Something temporary." He leaned against the fence. "You're not something, you're someone." She swallowed. "That's why I kept saying it. Share me with your friends. If I said it first, it hurt less." He walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "You don't have to protect yourself like that anymore." She shook her head. "I don't know how to believe that." "You don't have to believe it all at once," he said. "Just don't leave today." She laughed quietly through tears. "You always say that." "Because today matters," he replied. That evening, neighbors arrived unexpectedly. Not all of them, just a few. They stood awkwardly near the gate. "We heard about the storm," one said. "Thought we'd check in." The rancher nodded. "I appreciate that." They glanced at the woman. This time, no one looked away. "She helped a lot," another man admitted. The woman waited for discomfort. Instead, she felt something new, respect. It wasn't loud or perfect, but it was real. Later that night, she sat with the rancher on the porch. The stars stretched across the sky. The land was quiet again. "I don't want to leave," she said suddenly. but I'm afraid that wanting to stay will ruin everything." He considered her words carefully. "Wanting something doesn't ruin it, giving up does." She looked at him. "What if I disappoint you?" "Then we deal with it," he said. "Together." She took a deep breath. "No one has ever said that to me." He smiled faintly. "No one ever said it to me either." She stood up and walked toward the barn. After a moment she came back, not with her bag but with the veil. She placed it gently on the porch rail. "I don't need this anymore," she said. He didn't comment, he simply nodded. As days turned into weeks, the ranch changed, not in big ways but small ones. Laughter appeared sometimes. Conversations lasted longer. The woman unpacked fully. The bag disappeared. One afternoon, while repairing a fence, she said something without thinking. "This feels like home." She froze, afraid of what the word meant. The rancher smiled. "It is." That night she whispered the words that once defined her fear. "Share me with your friends." He looked at her steadily. "You," he said, finishing the sentence she had never allowed anyone to finish, "are not meant to be shared. You are meant to be chosen." She felt the truth of it settle into her bones. They stood together under the open sky, not as a perfect ending but as a real beginning. Two lonely people, no longer waiting to be passed along, finally choosing to stay.